I was at the Asia Pacific Leadership Program once, and I was spending quite a bit of time on self-awareness. And I was a little bit nervous because there was a monk in the leadership program from Bhutan, and you've got to be nervous when there's a monk from Bhutan and you're speaking on self-awareness, because you suddenly start realizing how nuanced your he didn't get it. He came to me after and said, Keith, I don't get it, because the Buddhist philosophy is one that is totally integrated. The notion that you can even talk about self-awareness and practice is just nonsensical to them. It's just not part of their worldview. So that was interesting. But I discovered, much to my chagrin, that he had gone and done a 10-year silent retreat. And he was 6 years into it, foraging for his own food, living in isolation in a cave in a forest in Bhutan. And after 6 years, he was called out of retreat by the monarchy, by the king, who's revered in Bhutan. Gembo is a very highly respected spiritual leader in the country, and the king called him out of retreat to help move the country to a constitutional monarchy that they did a few years ago. And Gembo was an integral part of that political movement towards a constitutional monarchy. So he speaks with as much irritation as a monk from Bhutan can about being called out after 6 years. He needs to go back 6 years. There's a nice little flip to that story. I was doing some work in Vietnam and came across him again. And I'd had this picture of my mind. You must have seen the picture. In that part of the world, Bhutan, and that they have this sheer cliff face. I remember once it was in one James Bond movie, and hanging off the cliff like an eagle's nest is like a monastery, a little wooden thing. And you think, oh my gosh, how on earth did they build it? How do you get up there? That's the picture. I'd seen one of these, and I thought, wouldn't it be great to go and visit a place like that? And it will make more sense when we talk story tomorrow. I'd love to go, but now I'm a little bit cautious because I don't want to just pop in. Here I'm speaking to a guy who's done a 10-year silent retreat. So I say to him, Gembo, because he said, Keith, you must come visit my country. I'd love to show you my beautiful country, Bhutan. Do you know it's the only country that has a formal policy of gross national happiness? I mean, they have a minister, I met her, they have a minister who sits in the cabinet whose portfolio is gross national happiness, and they measure it. I mean, you've got to want to visit a country that has gross national happiness as a ministerial portfolio. But he said, you must come visit. So now my mind's working. I'm thinking, okay, well, Gembo, do you have what they call these high places? He says, yes, we do. So now I'm thinking, okay, if I visit, I definitely want to go and spend a couple of nights. But hold on, I can't just go for a night. And I'm trying to calculate, you can't be away from it. So I stretch the limits of my duration. I say, well, if I come, could you take me to a high place and I'll spend a whole week there? And in my mind, a week is like a marathon, you know. So he looks at me and gave me no indication what was going through his mind, but I can only imagine. Because very patiently, very paternalistic, he says, Keith, if you go to the high place, you need to spend 5 years there. And you think, oh, you know, here I've asked for 5 days and it's 5. So silence and reflection, I think, is something we need to start reintroducing in our busy, hard-driven business worlds, not just in leadership programs or learning programs, but as a natural rhythm and part of how we do business. One of the things around strategy, and I am getting distracted here, but it's fine, we're not tracking hard against time. One of the nuances around strategy is, and this is some of Duggan's work, is that our brains often work best when we stop thinking about the problem we're trying to solve. So a simple little example, and it's based on cognitive theory, is this. You know, you meet somebody and you're battling to remember their name. Sarah, and I can't remember the name. 3 hours later, I'm driving home and I'm not even thinking about that engagement. And what happens? The name pops into your mind. And you think, oh, where was it when I needed it? That is an example of how our brains work. The information is always there. It's in a storage system, but at the time when I need it, it's like I just can't find the file. And so what cognitive theorists have started to understand is that often when we're trying to solve a problem, and typically strategic motives are like that, the more we think about it, the further the solution recedes. And what we need to do is disengage, change our focus, and then trust that that solution will find us. And that often what happens. So more aware strategic retreats and processes these days actually don't work till midnight, which typically they do. We've got to get our strategic plan, we've got to work. They punctuated with far more pauses and disengagement. Go and play around a tennis, around a golf, go for a walk, or do something totally non-related to the issues that we're trying to solve, and trust that the answer will find you. So it's actually switching off to switch on. And I often wonder what that would look like in business, because again, somebody was saying to me the other day, Keith, if my staff saw me sitting at my desk reading a book, it would get misinterpreted. I said, that's a real pity. And I said, maybe you need to run the risk of that, because until you do that, you're not giving permission for your staff to think, to reflect, to learn. But if they see their boss for 20 minutes every day, deliberately, consciously reading something, because the results of that will filter out in your language and your methodologies. They will start to see the difference that makes. But we've somehow squeezed that out. Somebody said every organization should be paying somebody to look out the window. And the problem is we often pay external people to do that because we don't allow it to be internal. But the best people to be looking out the window are internal people. And when they turn around to say storm clouds on the horizon, or they give their message, we often don't believe them because we're so busy. So again, it's the balcony. What is your balcony? How do you make sure that you have a balcony? And my balcony will look different to your balcony. And we'll see that tomorrow when we look at personal differences. But I do believe fundamentally that we all need a balcony. And so the question is, what does your balcony look like? How do you access it? And when you are on your balcony, what is it you're seeing about your organization? Those are the critical questions.